Hello, welcome to Scratching the Surface. My name's Kamron. I'm a social work student at the University of Toronto, and I'm doing my practicum placement this summer at Recalibrate Therapeutic Services. In this video, I'll be going over men's mental health. This will include a discussion on male socialization, the impact of loneliness on men, some of the physical and mental health outcomes for men, and some treatment approaches that are conducive to male psychology. Before we dive in though, I just want to pause and share a program that will potentially be starting soon with Recalibrate Therapeutic Services. We're launching a new therapeutic men's group, which will be a professionally facilitated, confidential space where men can come together and talk about the issues that we're discussing today in this video. Everything from relationship stress to work pressures to loneliness and emotional well-being. If you or someone you know is interested in joining, or if you'd just like some more information, please reach out to us by email or by phone, or visit our website at recalibratetherapeuticsservices.com for details on how to register. So without further ado, let's jump into the content today. So here's my presentation on men's mental health, the mental and physical health consequences of not wanting to talk about it. So we can begin by talking about the state of men's mental health today, globally and in North America, specifically Canada. Globally, mental health disorders affect 1 in 8 men, and many of those cases go undiagnosed or completely untreated. That's not because men aren't struggling, but because they probably aren't reaching out for help. Here in Canada, the numbers are particularly alarming. Nearly 1 in 4 Canadian men report moderate to severe risk of depression. But among men aged 19 to 29, that number jumps to over 51%. More than half of young Canadian men are experiencing significant depression symptoms. This certainly has an impact on communities, workplaces, and families. Now, when we look at the statistics for suicide, globally, men die from suicide at more than twice the rate of women, and when men attempt suicide, their attempts are 3 times more likely to result in death. In Canada, the picture is even worse. 75% of all completed suicides in 2019 were men. That's 3 out of every 4 deaths by suicide. But here's what's strange. Men are significantly less likely to be diagnosed with depression than women, yet they're more likely to die by suicide. This gap tells us something, and it's that men are either underdiagnosed, misdiagnosed, or simply not seeking help at all. And the data confirms that. Half of men who experience mental health difficulties never reach out to a professional for support. A Canadian study found that 53% of men keep their feelings to themselves, and 45% would rather not talk about their problems at all, which means that they're suffering in silence. So we have a crisis that's hiding in plain sight. Men are struggling, but they're not reaching out. They're not being diagnosed, and too often, the first sign of distress is the last. The question we need to ask ourselves is not just why this is happening, but what we can do about it. And that's what we'll be discussing in this video. But before we can talk about solutions, we need to understand the root causes. And it starts with how we socialize boys to become men, what researchers call the man box. So we've established the scope of the crisis, the staggering rates of depression, the silence around help seeking, and the lives lost to suicide. But to truly understand men's mental health, we have to understand how we socialize boys to become men. We have to talk about what researchers call the man box. The image here on the left of this slide represents the unwritten rules that society teaches boys from a very young age. They're told not to cry openly or express emotions except for anger, which is somehow acceptable, not to express weakness of any kind, to demonstrate power and control, especially over women, to be aggressive, to be dominant, and to be the protector, to not be like a woman because feminine is framed as lesser than, to be heterosexual and not like a gay man, to be tough, athletic, strong, and courageous, to make decisions without ever needing help, and in the most extreme version of these rules, to view women as property or objects. And even if some men do not agree or act exactly in ways prescribed by the man box, these unwritten rules still influence almost all men to some extent. And I think especially the ones about not expressing emotions or weakness, and to be the protector and to appear strong. It can be exhausting for men to always have to act like this, and it can lead to burnout without men even realizing it. The consequences of living inside the man box, or even trying to, are devastating. The image on the right of the slide shows what the research found about men who endorsed these man box rules compared to the men who rejected these rules. Men who strongly agreed with these rigid rules were 35 times more likely to have frequently verbally harassed a woman in public. They were 11 times more likely to have frequently bullied someone, whether it was verbally, physically, or online. 8 times more likely to have perpetrated sexual violence against an intimate partner. 28 times more likely to have coerced a partner into having sex. They were 5 times more likely to have perpetrated physical violence, 17 times more likely to hold violence-supportive attitudes, meaning that they see violence as a legitimate way to solve problems or assert dominance. They were 5 times more likely to disbelieve experiences of gender equality, and men trapped in the man box were 6 times more likely to engage in problem gambling and 2 times more likely to engage in binge drinking. So the man box isn't just about outdated ideas. It's about a set of beliefs that literally make men more dangerous to others and more destructive to themselves. It's a blueprint for isolation, violence, and suffering. But what's important is that these aren't inherent traits, but rather learned behaviors. And if they can be learned, then they can be unlearned. If they can be socialized into boys, then they can be socialized out of men. We have to ask, where do these rules come from and how do boys learn them? And that's exactly what we're going to explore in the next slide. So we've established what the man box is, a set of rigid rules about how men should be. And we've seen the consequences of living inside that box. The violence, the substance abuse, and the harm to others and oneself. But we have to think about where these rules come from and where boys learn these rules. The answer is that it comes from everywhere. The research shows that 4 major agents shape a man's self-concept. That's family, peer groups, schools, and the media. And today we have to add a 5th, which is digital socialization. Because the algorithms on our devices are just as powerful as a parent or a teacher. Let's start with family. This is the first and most powerful influence. From the moment a boy is born, he's treated differently than a girl. Boys are given different toys, different messages, and different expectations. Fathers in particular tend to be firmer in their expectations of gender conformity, and those expectations are stronger for sons than for daughters. Boys are often asked to do tasks requiring strength, and girls are asked to do tasks requiring neatness and care. And what's interesting is that it's considered somewhat acceptable for girls to challenge gender norms, but boys who don't conform face much harsher consequences. Then there are peer groups. During adolescence, being accepted by other boys becomes paramount, and for some it feels like life or death. Boys who don't conform face ridicule, bullying, or exclusion. They're called names, they're ostracized, and they're told that they're not real men. This is what researchers call in-group policing. The way that boys reinforce the rules of the man box onto each other. It's a system of social control maintained by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of humiliation, and fear of being seen as weak. Schools also play a powerful role. Depending on the school culture, boys may receive messages that they interpret as having to be athletic, masking weakness, and to be stoic in the face of adversities. Teachers and coaches often reinforce them without even realizing it, praising boys for being tough and shaming them for showing emotion. And then there's media, television, movies, advertising, and music. For decades, these have portrayed men as strong, silent, aggressive, and always in control. And now media has a strong role to play in digital socialization. Algorithms on platforms like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and X now operate alongside peers and families as powerful developmental contexts. Algorithms are often the primary reason that boys are exposed to masculinity-related content. So even if a boy doesn't search for it, the algorithm pushes that content his way anyways. Things like gym content, dating advice, hustle culture, and gradually more extreme material. It's a pipeline that can start with a workout video and end with misogynistic radicalization, all driven by an algorithm that rewards engagement over well-being. So we have a complex web of influences. Family sets the foundation, peers enforce the rules, schools reinforce the messages, and media amplifies it all. But something to keep in mind is that the healthy or unhealthy outcome of boys entering adulthood depends largely on their unique processes of male socialization. Some boys have families that challenge rigid norms. Some find peer groups that accept emotional expression. Some have teachers who model healthy masculinity. Some develop media literacy and can recognize manipulative content. These boys are more likely to enter adulthood with more flexible, healthy understandings of what it means to be a man. But some boys experience the opposite. They're raised in families that enforce these rigid gender norms. They're bullied by peers for showing any signs of vulnerability. They're exposed to algorithms that show them increasingly extreme content. And these boys are at a much higher risk of entering adulthood trapped in the man box, with all the consequences that come with it. So if socialization is part of the problem, problem, then re-socialization is part of the solution. We can't change any families or any peer groups or any algorithms, but we can create safe spaces where men can come together and talk about these issues, and where men can unlearn these messages and learn healthier ways of being. But I'd like to dive a little deeper into one of the major societal consequences of negative male socialization, which is the loneliness epidemic amongst men. So now that we have a good understanding of male socialization and the man box, and now that we're getting into the issue of the male loneliness epidemic, it's important to realize that the man box doesn't just restrict men's behavior, it isolates them. It cuts them off from the very connections they need to thrive. On the slide, I've provided mini flowcharts on how certain rules from the man box lead to loneliness and isolation and negative mental health consequences. The first example is don't show vulnerability. When men internalize this message, they stop reaching out and they stop telling their friends when they're struggling. They stop calling their parents when they feel overwhelmed. They stop talking to their partners when they feel scared or sad. And this just leads to even worse isolation and loneliness. The second example is to stay in control, which means that men must always be in command of their emotions, which means suppressing anything that feels uncomfortable. Instead of sharing what's really going on inside, they bottle it up. And over time, these emotions build up. Sadness becomes anger, fear becomes irritability, grief becomes numbness. The emotions don't disappear, they just build up, and sooner or later they come out, sometimes in unusual ways. And the third example here says that being strong means not needing others. This is perhaps the most damaging messaging of them all. Men are taught that needing help is a sign of weakness, and that a real man can handle these things on their own. So they carry burdens alone, they suffer alone, and they struggle alone, all the while calling it strength. But this is more so unnecessary hardship than it is strength. It's suffering that could be shared and worked through with someone else, but isn't just because of a rule that wasn't true in the first place. So in order to cope with this loneliness, men often resort to unhealthy coping mechanisms. The first example here on the slide is like becoming a workaholic, immersing themselves in their careers to avoid feeling anything else. The promotion becomes a distraction, overtime becomes an escape, but this can just lead to burnout, which is another problem. Some men turn to substance use, for example alcohol, drugs, and prescription medications. This can numb the pain temporarily, but it deepens the isolation and just creates more problems on top of old ones. Some men will just withdraw further and isolate themselves from their friends, their community, and their family. They'll stop showing up, they'll stop answering calls, and they'll disappear into themselves, convinced that they're protecting others from their burden. Some men express their pain through anger or irritability, which is the only emotion that the man box deems acceptable of men. So they lash out at their partners, their children, their friends, and this can lead to confusion when these relationships fall apart. And unfortunately, some turn to online radicalization. They find their way into the Manosphere, online communities that offer false belonging, while peddling misogyny, rage. They find validation, but it's validation that comes at the cost of their humanity. So loneliness isn't just sad, it can be dangerous and destructive. It's a vicious cycle where the man box isolates men, then they cope in unhealthy ways, then the coping deepens the isolation, and the isolation worsens their state of loneliness and mental health in general. Breaking that cycle is the only way out. So now that we understand the social determinants of health for men and the impact of male socialization and loneliness, I'd like to now get into the potential mental and physical health outcomes for men who experience loneliness or choose not to reach out for help for their mental health problems or grievances. We can start with mental health. Loneliness is a direct risk factor for anxiety and depression, and we already saw the staggering rates of depression amongst young men. It's a major driver of substance use disorders, as men turn to alcohol and drugs to numb the pain. It increases the risk of Alzheimer's disease and dementia, since social isolation literally shrinks the brain over time. And most tragically, loneliness is one of the strongest predictors of suicidal ideation. Men who are lonely are far more likely to think about ending their lives. But the physical health consequences are just as alarming. Chronic loneliness raises blood pressure, so hypertension becomes more likely. It increases inflammation in the arteries, leading to cardiovascular disease. It disrupts metabolism, raising the risk of type 2 diabetes, and it weakens the immune system, making men more susceptible to infections and slower to heal from illness. And I've also put on this slide a sobering quote from Dr. Columbus Baptiste. He says that loneliness carries a mortality risk equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Being chronically lonely is as dangerous to one's physical health as smoking about a pack of cigarettes every single day. This way it increases the risk of premature death by about 50%. So when we talk about men's mental health, we can't separate it from men's physical health. They're the same problem. The loneliness that starts with the man box doesn't stay in the mind, but rather travels through the whole body, shortening lives and destroying the health from inside out. Breaking that cycle can make people feel better, improve relationships, and save lives. So now I just want to dedicate a slide to arguably the worst outcome from male loneliness. This is the loneliness to misogyny pipeline, and it's gotten so much attention that there have been documentaries and even a Netflix series that address this issue. It starts with the Manosphere, which is a loose, decentralized network of communities and influencers that promote male supremacy, anti-feminism, and hostility against women. It includes incels, which is short for involuntary celibates, men's rights activists, pickup artists, and groups like Men Going Their Own Way. These spaces don't create loneliness or insecurities, but they find it and they weaponize it. The Manosphere exploits unmet needs and converts that pain into hate. I've put sort of a flowchart on the slide to show the process step by step. It starts with loneliness and insecurity, when a young man feels isolated, rejected, or like he's falling behind, but he can't ask for help, because that would be a sign of weakness. Then comes the algorithm exposure. He's scrolling through TikTok or YouTube, maybe consuming gym content or dating advice, and the algorithm pushes more of this content and similar content into this person's feed. The content gradually shifts from self-improvement to resentment. And it's not necessarily that he searched for this sort of content, but the content found him instead. Next is validation and belonging, which is when the Manosphere offers him something that he's been missing, which is community. He finds other men who feel the same way, who validate his pain, and they give him someone to blame, which is usually women. Then comes the ideological hardening. This person is now in an echo chamber where he's told that men have been abandoned by society, that women are the problem, and that violence is justified. And the resentment becomes this person's identity. At this point, a person may become radicalized and start glorifying individuals who have acted on these beliefs before. For the men who unfortunately fall into these sorts of spaces, they may experience further consequences that just add up and compound to their current mental state. Body dysmorphia becomes common because these spaces tell men that their bodies are inadequate, so they're encouraged to engage in harmful behaviors like steroid or testosterone use and extreme dieting. These spaces also stigmatize help seeking and teach men that therapy is for weak individuals. Rage and aggression are built into the discourse within these communities, so they're told that marginalized groups are to blame for the issues that they're experiencing, and suicidal ideation increases understandably under these conditions. So it's a vicious cycle where unhealthy male ideals leads to loneliness, and loneliness leads to vulnerability to being sucked into the Manosphere. And breaking this cycle means intervening early. It means creating spaces where men can find genuine belonging and not other men just trying to take advantage of them. It means offering real support, the kind of support that the Manosphere pretends to offer but never delivers. So we've laid out the problem, the man box, the loneliness epidemic, the physical and mental health tolls, and the pipeline towards radicalization. It's a heavy picture and it can feel overwhelming, but we know what works. We have evidence-based approaches that actually help men break free from these cycles. On the slide here, I've put 3 treatment approaches that have strong research backing for helping men with their mental health. First on the slide here is male-specific psychotherapy. This is an approach that adapts traditional therapy models to consider traditional masculinity ideology, which are those rigid rules that we've been talking about from the man box. It addresses gender socialization directly, helping men understand how masculine norms are contributing to their distress. Research by Walter and their colleagues in 2024 found that men receiving male-specific psychoeducation showed a stronger decrease in shame and negative affect compared to men who received standard psychoeducation. The intervention helped shift men from externalizing symptoms, like anger and irritability, to recognizing more prototypical depression symptoms. The men involved in the research described the discussion of male gender role socialization as the most helpful part of the intervention. They felt seen, they felt understood, and they felt less alone. Second on the slide here is cognitive behavioral therapy. Harvard Health described CBT as like taking a class to better manage one's emotions and to better understand one's behavior. Many men find it appealing because it's short-term, structured, and focused on current issues. It's action-oriented with concrete homework assignments. And that particular problem-solving approach is a big draw for men who may be more skeptical of open-ended therapy. Research shows that CBT works effectively for depression, anxiety, and even muscle dysmorphia in male gym goers. It gives men the practical tools that they can use right away, which builds confidence and momentum. And third on the slide here, which is possibly the most important, is group programs focused on men's mental health and experiences. This is exactly what we're aiming to provide at Recalibrate Therapeutic Services. Men's groups provide something that individual therapy cannot, and that's peer connection. Men see other men being vulnerable, and it gives them permission to do the same. They realize that they're not alone, that other men struggle with the same things. They practice being authentic with each other, and that practice translates to relationships outside of the group. Research shows that peer support is a key factor in men's health promotion and facilitates positive behavioral change. But approaches alone aren't enough. We have to change the culture around men's mental health. We have to normalize expressing emotions. We have to tell men and show them that sharing emotions is not weakness, but it's strength, and that vulnerability is courage, not failure. We have to model authentic relationships because men need to see examples of men who are empathetic, who apologize when they're wrong, and who show up for each other without competition or posturing. We have to overcome the stigma and shame associated with seeking help. That means challenging phrases like man up when we hear them. It means reframing therapy as a tool and not a punishment. And in order to do that, we have to build trust and dispel trust issues. Many men have unfortunately been burned by relationships, by systems, by their own experiences, and so we have to earn their trust by being consistent, non-judgmental, and honest. We have to create safe spaces for each other. Spaces where men can put down the mask, take off the armor, and just be human. Spaces without competition, without performance, and without the pressure to impress anyone. And most importantly, we have to normalize seeking support before hitting rock bottom. Too many men wait until they're in crisis, until they've lost relationships, lost jobs, lost hope, and so prevention matters. Just like we stretch before exercising to prevent injury, we should approach mental health the same way. So my closing message is that men's mental health is not a niche issue. It's a social justice issue and a public health issue. And every time a man reaches out, he's breaking a generational cycle. Every time we create a space where vulnerability is welcomed, we're pushing back against the man box and the toxic ideologies that exploit loneliness. And I'd like to end where I started with a sort of invitation. The therapeutic men's group that is launching soon at Recalibrate Therapeutic Services is a space for men to gather, to talk, to connect, and to heal. And so if you or someone you know is interested, then please reach out to us by phone, email, or just visit the website. Link is in the description below. Because the truth is that needing help is not weakness. Support makes us stronger. And when we support the men in our lives and our communities, we are building a safer and healthier world for all of us. But that's just scratching the surface. If you'd like to learn more about the topics that I discussed in this video, the links to the sources that I used for this video are in the description below. And if you or someone you know is struggling with loneliness, emotional well-being, relationship issues, or pressure in the workplace, or you recognize some of the unhealthy coping mechanisms that we talked about in this video, then don't hesitate to reach out to Recalibrate Therapeutic Services, where the experienced mental health practitioners can assist you with non-judgmental and compassionate care. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something from this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.